So this is actually the fastest gaming PC that you can build right now, and it is ITX. Believe it or not, in here is a 4090 and a 7950X 3D, and it runs pretty damn good. So some of you might remember this case from some of my previous videos, some of the earlier prototypes and the kind of early revisions, but what we have here is finally the finished model. It is the new Dan C4-SFX. And so I kind of wanted to explore today what was possible with the most powerful hardware on the market, and also just most of all see how it compares to some of the other really optimized, really small cases that I've built in, like the T1, the M1, and the Dan E4-H2O. And a good place to start is a size comparison. Overall, this is about a 15-liter case. That makes it slightly bigger than a lot of the stuff that I've built in previously. T1, for example, is about 10 liters, and case is under 13, but this is still definitely what I'd call small. You could have this thing sitting on your desk right next to your mouse pad or beside your keyboard, for example. It doesn't take up much space at all. Everything is made here out of 1.5mm aluminium, so it's side panels, top panel, all of the kind of metal that makes up the frame of the case as well. If you're familiar with the build quality of something like an N-Case M1 or a Dan E4-H2O, same factory makes this case, which is Lee & Lee. So the kind of machining and the premium feel is basically the same. I would say that the panel feel is maybe a bit stronger actually than what you'll find on an N-Case M1, and the push pins as well just feel a little bit dialed in and kind of like more locked into the frame of the case than the N-Case. Overall though, very nice looking case. I mean, very clean on the exterior, zero branding at all. There's just a power button and a USB-C on the top, and there will be an all black model too, but this two-tone silver and black definitely gets my vote. Now, opening up the C4-SFX for the first time, to be honest, it's a bit weird. Things just don't seem to be where they should be. Motherboard tray is upside down, nothing really looks familiar, and that's because the internal layout of the C4 is inverted. Basically, everything is upside down. GPU faces the top of the case, power supply and motherboard are at the bottom, and this also means that your components will face the opposite side of your desk. So it seems a bit weird and off-putting at first, but this is 100% the way to go if you want the best thermal and noise performance out of a case like this. Primarily having the GPU breathing from the top instead of the bottom, the performance difference is just night and day. And the new C4 can fit absolute monsters. Like, putting the 4090 FE in here was actually a breeze. Like, for a case this size, you would imagine there'd be some wrestling or kind of like wiggling, a bit of struggling at least, but no, you kind of remove this bracket here, drop that behemoth of a GPU in there, and it really is no problem. Actually, there's quite a bit of room left over at the front in terms of length, and even in terms of thickness as well. The only exception is that you will need a custom power cable to kind of get that side panel closed. Yeah, you won't be able to use the default kind of adapter that comes with the 40 series GPUs, and yeah, I'll leave the one that I have here linked down below. With that, the side panels close with no problems at all. But overall, 3 slot cards up to 340mm in length and 148mm in width can fit here. Even up to 3.9 slot cards will technically be okay, but they'll have to have a small compromise on the length and width. Now, despite these very generous GPU dimensions, there are actually a lot of 4080s, 4090s, and 7900 XTXs that won't fit in this, so definitely make sure to double check what you're working with. The 7900 XTX Tough OC that I used in my previous build, for example, that has no hope of fitting in here at all. It's both too wide and too long. Now, something really interesting in the C4 that I've never seen in any other case is this vent that sits underneath the GPU. This is designed specifically for Founders Edition cards and kind of aims to prevent the GPU from heating up your CPU, so before the heat from the graphics card can enter the rest of the case and start heating up different components, it's caught and then vented straight out. What's also pretty cool though is that it kind of doubles as a graphics card support bracket. So the 4090 FE that I have in there, it's pretty heavy and it's resting on it pretty firmly. Thankfully, there are some rubber grommets, so it's not like a metal on metal situation. And thirdly, this thing also works as a cable management cover. It kind of blocks any of those stray cables from getting into the fan on the graphics card. CPU cooling potential in the C4-SFX is also pretty strong. You can install a 240 or 280mm liquid cooler using the side bracket. Decent amount of thickness clearance there as well, a bit more than you'd see in an N-Case M1. What's way more interesting to me though is air cooling, because even for an enthusiast gaming machine, you really don't need a lot of CPU cooling power to kind of get the most frames possible. Like, let's say for a 5800X3D, the new 7800X3D, or even for a 13600K, you can get away with a pretty decently sized air cooler, which is exactly what we've done here. This is the new Noctua D12L, which is one of their newest CPU coolers, and it fits absolutely perfectly actually in the new C4. We've got 145mm of clearance available here, and the D12L is exactly 145mm, which is just super satisfying. So perfect fit here, and in the C4 you've got this removable panel at the bottom, which you'll definitely want to make use of, otherwise reaching all of those motherboard cables is basically impossible. Power supply installation is also pretty easy, side bracket design works pretty well, although that GPU vent does make it a little bit of a squeeze for the cables. And for those wondering, I'm using the SF750 Platinum from Corsair here, which can basically run anything that you'd be installing in this case. And that brings us to the finished build. Ryzen 7950X 3D plugged into the Asus X670i Strix, 32 gigs of 6000 CL32 memory, 3 terabytes of M.2 NVMe storage, knocked to a D12L, Corsair SF750, and that giant RTX 4090 up top. For a sub 15-liter package, it's pretty damn impressive. I've also installed a 140mm fan on the side here, which acts as exhaust, so kind of pulling all of the hot air outside of the case. This one is the Arctic P14, which seems to work pretty well. I will leave it linked down below. And the amount of heat that comes out of this case with these kind of components is just really insane. So if you're building in the C4, definitely go with a side 140mm as exhaust. That thing really does help quite a lot. So for a bit of context on kind of what we have here, it's about 2 liters larger than an N-Case M1, but in the M1 you can't fit a knock to a D12 and you can't fit a 4090 FE. So, you know, a little bit larger than the N-Case, but I think that extra space definitely gets put to some good use. Now I played around with this build for a bit, you know, tried to see how I could optimize the thermal performance as much as possible. And the first thing that I wanted to test out was that GPU vent. You know, is it good or should we just remove it? Turns out if you're running a big NVIDIA FE card, it does actually do its job. GPU temps pretty much stay the same with or without it, but CPU temps did drop by a couple degrees with it installed. Keep in mind though, that's with our CPU cooler pulling in air through the rear of the case, so not even taking in the warm air that's building up inside. For AIO setups though, I could see this having potentially a bigger impact. Even in this setup though, you know, I know it's only a couple of degrees, but I do feel better knowing that the interior of the case will be a little bit cooler with the vent installed, all at the same time of not really having any noticeable impact to the GPU temps. What was super interesting to me though, is how much you can improve the GPU temps by adding slim fans at the top as intake. You might have noticed that the 4090 is getting a little bit toasty in there. We can improve that by about 7 to 8 degrees with a pair of slim 120mm fans. And since the GPU is running a lot cooler now, the fan curve is also quieter. Adding those fans ends up being a quieter setup. So 4090 sitting at 67 degrees at a pretty typical gaming load, 370 to 380 watts. That's pretty damn impressive. Occasionally there are games that push the 4090 a bit higher than that though. Control here at 4K ultra settings with ray tracing maxed out and with no DLSS, we can push the 4090 to around 425 watts. Even there though, 75 degrees, which is not bad at all. Doom Eternal 4K, about 370 watts here and about 70 degrees. Then when adding things like DLSS and frame generation, you'll see GPU load and temps even lower. And then occasionally you have games like Forza Horizon 5, which run extremely light on the power, just 63 there. And look, it's not what I'd call a silent gaming setup, but it's definitely at the point where it could compete against some mid towers. I'll also note that while I've installed 120mm fans at the top here that do make quite a big difference, you can actually install larger 140mm fans there instead, which will get even more coverage across the graphics card, and there you'll likely see even better thermal and noise performance. Now as for CPU cooling, the D12L is 100% the way to go here if you're building a gaming focused system. I just really like that air cooling setup a lot, but for heavy CPU rendering and encoding, like if that's your job that you do for work, a liquid cooling setup would be a better choice. The 7950X 3D here is a bit of an odd chip, as we know at this point. It kind of hits 90 degrees in Cinebench no matter what CPU cooler you use, which is interesting. But here with the D12L, I was able to get it to around 145 watts of power draw, which is pretty close to the 150, 155 or so that I've seen with much larger liquid cooling setups. So not much of a difference on this particular chip, but if you were using like a 13700K or a 7950X non-3D, then yeah, a liquid cooling setup would be a better choice for all core workloads. I think the best way to look at this case actually is like the perfect upgrade from the N case M1. I know there are a lot of you who are currently using an N case and it doesn't fit the newer, larger graphics cards. When you think about the new C4, it's basically an M1, but just larger and upside down. There just aren't many ITX cases out there that can run a 4090 Fe at full load, like we're talking above 400 watts, and have reasonable noise levels as well. Again, it's not the quietest 4090 machine out there, but I'd say for, sub 20 liters, it's probably the best configuration for a 4090 Fe that you could build with. I would say the T1 4090 build that we did recently was almost there. I mean, the kind of temperatures were pretty similar, but the noise levels were definitely a little bit louder. At the same time, that was like a 5 liter smaller configuration, which is pretty damn impressive in its own right. So for me, C4 versus T1, that comparison, it feels pretty reasonable. It's an even trade-off, I feel, in terms of cooling versus size, and also the extra cooling potential that you get for the CPU. The last thing that I'll mention is the custom loop potential, and the easiest way to explain it here is if you take a look at what I've done with my N-Case M1, and imagine two 280mm radiators instead of two 240s. So the layout would be exactly the same, one on the side and one on the bottom, or in this case on the top. Pretty beefy radiator support overall, and with that much cooling, you could basically run any components that you'd want. But yeah, for now, the C4 is looking like a pretty damn good, like top tier ITX case. Like, I think this is one of your best options at the moment. Still need to do like a direct comparison where I take the same components and put it in like an NR200P Max, put it in the Dan C4-H2O, see what kind of performs the best in terms of temperatures and noise levels. But I mean, at least for now, building with a 4090 Fe and a 7950X 3D, you can tell that this thing is pretty damn confident when it comes to cooling. But yeah, if you guys are looking to build something similar, I think it's a pretty damn solid configuration. Like if you want to go instead with a 7800X 3D and a 4080 Fe up top, man, that is like a perfect ITX gaming build. So I'll leave those parts linked down below, as well as the ones that I've used here as well. The C4-SFX will be going on sale soon. 200 euros is what they're asking for it, which seems pretty fair given the kind of build quality that you're getting and the kind of tier of case that we're working with. But yeah, definitely gets my recommendation for sure. Otherwise, huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.